Mill told my husband he should take a paternity test to be sure, she said, you never know. I took one with our dog and sent her the results. She was livid. Story 1. Let me start by saying that I love my husband, Clive, with all my heart. We've been married for 12 years, and while our life together hasn't been perfect, we've built a strong, trusting relationship. We have 2 beautiful kids, a cozy home in Tennessee, and a golden retriever named Samson who's practically part of the family. Life has its ups and downs, but we've always managed to weather the storms together. The one dark cloud that never seems to go away? Clive's mother, Marnie. Marnie has hated me since the moment we met. I can't sugarcoat it, she's a textbook passive-aggressive, manipulative mother-in-law who thinks no one on earth is good enough for her son. Over the years, I've gotten used to her backhanded compliments, her constant need to criticize everything I do, and her relentless attempts to undermine me. But this time? She crossed the line in a way I never thought possible. It started at a family barbecue at Clive's cousin Elsie's house. We were all gathered in her backyard, kids running around, adults chatting and laughing, burgers sizzling on the grill. It was one of those warm, sticky Tennessee afternoons where everything feels just a little bit slower. For a while, it seemed like Marnie might actually behave herself. She was sitting in the shade, fanning herself with a napkin and gossiping with Elsie. I thought, for once, we'd make it through a family event without her stirring up drama. I should have known better. Clive and I were sitting together, enjoying a rare quiet moment while the kids played, when Marnie waddled over with her plate piled high with food. She plopped herself down next to Clive, adjusted her floppy sun hat, and gave me one of her signature tight-lipped smiles, the kind that makes me want to scream. She didn't even acknowledge me before turning to Clive and casually saying, "So, have you ever thought about getting a paternity test for the kids?" I froze. Clive froze. The conversation around us seemed to stop, though I might have just been imagining it. "What did you just say?" Clive asked, his voice low and sharp. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Marnie said, waving a hand like she'd just commented on the weather. "I'm just saying, it's something a lot of men are doing these days. You hear stories all the time about men raising kids that aren't theirs. It's better to be safe than sorry." I felt my chest tighten, and my face went hot. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling. "Are you seriously suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she cut me off, all wide-eyed innocence. "I'm just saying, it's something to consider. You never know." Clive was furious. "Mom, that's enough. Kala is my wife, and those are my kids. I don't know what you're trying to do here, but it's not going to work." Marnie shrugged, completely unfazed. "I just think it's better to be sure, that's all. No harm in it." No harm? I couldn't even process what I was hearing. It was like she'd sucker punched me in the gut. For the rest of the barbecue, I tried to keep it together, but I could feel the anger bubbling just below the surface. Every time I looked at her smug face, I wanted to scream. When we got home that evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. As soon as the kids were in bed, I unloaded on Clive. Can you believe her? The audacity to say something like that in front of everyone. "She's basically accusing me of cheating on you." Clive sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. It was out of line. I'll talk to her." "That's not enough," I said, pacing the living room. "She can't keep getting away with this. She's always pushing, always trying to make me look bad. This was too far." "I agree," Clive said, his voice calm but firm. "But you know how she is. If we confront her, she'll just play the victim and make it seem like we're overreacting." He was right, of course. Marnie had mastered the art of twisting situations to her advantage. She'd cry, make herself the center of attention, and somehow convince everyone that I was the bad guy. But this time, I couldn't let it slide. I needed to do something that would shut her up for good. The idea came to me a few days later. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when Samson hopped up beside me and flopped his big, fluffy head onto my lap. I absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears, my mind still spinning with anger and frustration. And then it hit me, if Marnie wanted a paternity test, I'd give her one. Just not the kind she was expecting. I called Clive into the room and laid out my plan. At first, he looked at me like I was crazy. "You want to do a paternity test? With the dog?" "Think about it," I said, grinning. She never specified which kid needed the test. "Samson's practically your son anyway. Let's give her what she wants." Clive stared at me for a moment, and then he burst out laughing. "You're evil. I love it." The next day, I ordered 2 DNA kits online, one for humans and one for pets. When they arrived, I swabbed Clive's cheek and took a sample from Samson, trying not to laugh the whole time. Clive thought the whole thing was hilarious, but I was dead serious. This wasn't just a joke to me, it was a way to hit Marnie where it hurt. If she wanted to question our family, I'd show her just how ridiculous her accusations were. I sent the samples off to the labs and waited. Every day, I checked the mail like a woman possessed. I couldn't wait to see her reaction. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. I ripped open the envelopes with shaky hands, my heart pounding with anticipation. The human DNA test, of course, confirmed a 99.9% match between Clive and Samson. It was completely meaningless scientifically, but it was exactly what I needed. The pet DNA test revealed Samson's breed breakdown, mostly golden retriever, with a little bit of mixed breed thrown in. Perfect. I printed out the results, making sure to highlight the part about Clive being a 99.9% match with Samson. Then, I sat down to write a letter. Dear Marnie, you suggested Clive take a paternity test, so we did. We're happy to report that the results confirm he is, in fact, Samson's father. Thank you for your concern about our family's integrity. We hope this puts your mind at ease. Sincerely, Calla and Clive. I put everything in an envelope and mailed it to her house. As I dropped it into the mailbox, I felt a rush of satisfaction. For once, I had the upper hand. I didn't have to wait long for her response. 3 days later, my phone started ringing. It was Marnie. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. Finally, she left a message, her voice high-pitched and trembling with rage. Calla, I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but this is completely inappropriate. I'm going to talk to Clive about this. You've crossed the line. I played the voicemail for Clive, who laughed so hard he had tears streaming down his face. She's losing it, he said, shaking his head. This is brilliant. I haven't spoken to Marnie since I sent her the test results, but I know this isn't over. It's never over with her. Still, for now, I'm enjoying the silence. If she wants to keep questioning my loyalty and my family, she'll have to think twice about what kind of answers she might get. After Marnie's meltdown voicemail, things stayed tense but quiet for a while. She didn't call me again, but I knew she wasn't going to let it go. She never does. I could feel the storm brewing in the background, and sure enough, it hit a week later when Clive came home from work looking annoyed. Mom called me today, he said, dropping his bag by the door. She's still going on about the test. She says you're making a mockery of the family. I rolled my eyes. She made a mockery of this family the second she questioned your kid's paternity in public. Clive nodded, clearly agreeing. I told her to drop it, but she's insisting we come over this weekend so we can clear the air. Clear the air? I snorted. She's not looking for peace. She's looking for an apology she's never going to get. Clive sighed, his face weary. I know. But if we don't show up, she'll tell everyone we're avoiding her because we're guilty of something. I think we should go, Calla. Let her say whatever she wants, and then we can shut it down for good. I didn't want to step foot in that woman's house, but Clive was right. If we didn't face her head on, she'd twist the narrative into something even more ridiculous. Fine, I thought. If Marnie wanted a confrontation, she was going to get one. We showed up at Marnie's house that Saturday, the kids in tow and Samson tagging along for good measure. Marnie's face twisted into a sour smile the moment she saw me, but she plastered on her fake sweetness for Clive and the kids. She didn't even acknowledge Samson, which I took as a personal win. The kids ran off to play in the backyard while Clive and I followed Marnie into the living room. She'd laid out snacks on the coffee table, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Well, Marnie said, sitting down with a dramatic sigh. I suppose we should talk about everything. She looked pointedly at me, her lips pressed so tight they practically disappeared. Sure, I said, matching her energy. Let's talk. She didn't waste any time. Calla, I just don't understand why you felt the need to humiliate me like that. I was simply suggesting something that plenty of people do these days. There was no reason to take it so personally. No reason? I said, raising an eyebrow. Marnie, you accused me of cheating on your son in front of the whole family. How am I not supposed to take that personally? I didn't accuse you of anything, she snapped. I was just saying it's good to be sure. It's common sense. It's common sense to trust your son and his wife, I shot back. You didn't even bother to hide what you were implying. And you know what? I don't care what you think about me. But you crossed the line when you dragged my kids into it. Clive jumped in then, his voice calm but firm. Mom, Calla's right. What you said was out of line, and you owe her an apology. Marnie's mouth fell open like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I owe her an apology? For what? For wanting what's best for my son? No, for disrespecting my wife, Clive said. For disrespecting our marriage, our family, and our kids. You've been trying to undermine Calla since the day we got married, and I'm done with it. Marnie's face turned red. I can't believe you're taking her side over mine. I'm your mother, Clive. Don't you see how she's poisoning you against me? Clive stood up, his expression steely. You've been poisoning yourself. Calla didn't do anything wrong, and you know it. If you can't respect her, then you don't get to be a part of our lives. It's that simple. Marnie sputtered, trying to come up with a response, but Clive didn't give her the chance. He motioned for me to follow him. Let's go, he said. We're done here. We gathered the kids and headed for the door, but not before I gave Marnie one final parting gift. I reached into my bag and pulled out a framed copy of the paternity test results, the ones with Samson's name, and set it on the coffee table. "Since you were so concerned about paternity," I said, keeping my voice sweet, "I thought you might want a keepsake. Just to remind you how ridiculous you've been." Clive snorted, and even the kids giggled as we walked out the door. Samson, loyal as ever, let out a loud bark as if to say goodbye. Marnie didn't follow us. She just sat there, stunned and fuming. That was the last time we heard from Marnie for months. Clive kept his word, he cut her off completely. No phone calls, no visits, no invitations to family events. It was peaceful, to say the least. The kids didn't notice her absence, and Samson certainly didn't miss her either. Eventually, Marnie did try to reach out. She sent a letter, dripping with self-pity, about how much she missed her precious son and grandchildren. She didn't mention me once. Clive read it, rolled his eyes, and tossed it in the trash. "She'll never change," he said. "But that doesn't mean we have to put up with her." And just like that, Marnie lost the power she'd been clinging to for years. The best revenge wasn't the letter or the paternity test, it was showing her that we didn't need her approval to be happy. Clive and I are stronger than ever, the kids are thriving, and Samson? He's still the most DNA-verified dog in Tennessee. Marnie wanted to tear us apart, but in the end, all she did was push us closer together. Story 2. My husband got arrested, and everything I thought I knew about my life exploded in an instant. I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I'll start at the moment it happened because that's when my world fell apart. It was a regular Tuesday morning. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. I was in the middle of folding laundry on the couch while watching one of those cooking shows where they make food I could never dream of replicating. I had just finished a pile of socks when the doorbell rang. I figured it was the mailman or maybe one of our neighbors. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and 2 men in suits were standing there. Not just any suits, though, they had the kind of look you only see in movies. Dark, tailored, and way too serious. I could tell immediately they weren't selling me anything. "Are you Eloise Kettering?" one of them asked. I nodded, my stomach already twisting into knots. He pulled out a badge and said, "We're with the FBI. Is your husband, Orville Kettering, home?" I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. "The FBI? My husband?" I stammered, "No, he's out. He went to pick up some groceries." "Why? What's going on?" They exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. "We need to speak with him immediately." "Can we come in?" I don't know why I let them in. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was because they were FBI agents, and I thought you couldn't say no to them. They stepped into my living room, their polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, and started asking questions. How long had I known Orville? Did I know about any of his business dealings? Had I noticed anything unusual? I didn't have answers. Orville was a welder. He worked long hours, came home smelling like metal and grease, and spent his weekends tinkering in the garage or watching football. Business dealings? What business dealings? The man barely handled our cable bill. Then, one of them got a call on his phone. He listened for a moment, nodded, and said, "He's on his way back." The other agent turned to me and said, "We need you to stay calm, Mrs. Kettering. Your husband is being taken into custody. He'll have the chance to explain everything." I couldn't even process what they were saying. Taken into custody? Orville? For what? I tried to ask, but they just repeated the same vague nonsense about how it was a matter of national security. When Orville walked through the door, carrying a bag of groceries, his face went white as soon as he saw them. He didn't even try to argue or ask what was happening. He just set the bag down, raised his hands, and said, "I'm guessing this is about Red Horizon." I'll never forget that moment. Red Horizon. 2 words I'd never heard before but would haunt me for the rest of my life. The agents didn't answer him, just read him his rights and put him in handcuffs. I was standing there, frozen, tears running down my face. Orville looked at me, just one quick glance before they let him out the door, and said, "Don't come to the trial, Eloise. Promise me. Stay out of it." Then he was gone. The next few days were a nightmare. The house felt empty without him, but it wasn't peaceful. Every knock at the door or ring of the phone made me jump. I kept replaying that moment in my head, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. What was Red Horizon? What did Orville mean when he said, "Stay out of it"? And why the FBI? I tried calling him, but I was told he couldn't take my calls. His lawyer reached out to me a few days later, a sharp-talking guy named Jasper who seemed way too comfortable dealing with situations like this. He told me not to worry, that they'd get through this, but he wouldn't tell me what Orville was being charged with. "It's best if you don't know," he said, which only made me more desperate for answers. The whispers in the neighborhood started almost immediately. Rockford isn't a big place, and something like this spreads fast. People who used to wave at me from their porches suddenly avoided eye contact. My coworkers at the dental office stopped inviting me to lunch. Even the cashier at the grocery store looked at me differently. I was the wife of that guy, and everyone seemed to have their own version of what Orville had done. Despite everything, I couldn't stay away from the trial. Orville had begged me not to come, but how could I just sit at home while my husband, was being accused of God knows what? So, on the first day of the trial, I showed up at the courthouse. I sat in the back, hoping he wouldn't see me, and braced myself for whatever was about to come out. I didn't have to wait long. The prosecution opened with a statement that sounded like something out of a crime thriller. Orville wasn't just a welder, they said. He was one of the masterminds behind a massive smuggling operation called Operation Red Horizon. They claimed he'd been moving illegal weapons, guns, explosives, military-grade hardware, across state lines for years. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Orville? Weapons smuggling? It didn't make any sense. The man I knew hated violence. He wouldn't even watch action movies because they made him uncomfortable. Then they started presenting evidence. Emails, bank records, surveillance footage. There he was, my husband, meeting with shady men in parking lots, signing off on shipments, and wiring money to offshore accounts. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like watching a stranger. This wasn't the Orville I married. It couldn't be. The trial dragged on, and with every day, the picture of who Orville really was became clearer and uglier. He wasn't just involved in Red Horizon, he was one of the architects. They had code names for each other, secret drop points, and connections that stretched across the country. Orville had been living a double life for years, and I had been completely blind to it. During a recess, I finally got the chance to speak to him. I don't even know how I managed to keep it together as they led me into the small room where he was waiting. He looked awful, tired, defeated, like he'd aged 10 years in a matter of weeks. "Why, Orville?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why would you do this? Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, rubbing his temples like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I didn't want you to know, Eloise. I didn't want this to touch you." "That's not an answer," I said, my anger bubbling up. "Do you even understand what you've done? To us? To me?" He looked me in the eyes then, and for a moment, I saw the man I fell in love with. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said. "It started small. A favor for a friend. Then it snowballed. By the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. I couldn't back out. I wanted to scream at him, to cry, to hit him. But I couldn't do any of those things. I just sat there, numb, as he tried to explain how he'd gotten tangled up in something so massive and dangerous. Nothing he said made it better. Nothing could. And now, here I am, sitting in this empty house, wondering how my life spiraled into this nightmare. The trial isn't over yet, but I already know how it's going to end. Orville is going to prison, and I'm going to be left picking up the pieces of a life that feels like a lie. I don't even know what to do next. The day the verdict came down, I wasn't surprised. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, smuggling, wire fraud, and enough other charges to make sure Orville would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The judge didn't hold back, either, 35 years, no parole. I sat in the courtroom as they read the sentence, staring at my hands. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just empty. After the trial, I thought about disappearing, packing up, moving away, starting over somewhere no one had ever heard of Rockford or Red Horizon. But then I realized something. Orville wasn't the only one who ruined my life. Those men, the ones who worked with him, the ones he answered to, they were just as guilty. Maybe more so. They were the ones who pulled the strings, and they were still out there, free. I wasn't going to let that slide. It started small. I went through Orville's old things, the boxes in the attic, the garage, even his laptop, which I hadn't touched in years. Most of it was useless junk, but then I found an old burner phone tucked into a toolbox. The messages were still there, cryptic exchanges with names I didn't recognize. Names like Carter and Solace. They talked about shipments, payments, and places. I wrote everything down. At first, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm not a detective. I'm not even good with technology. But I had time, lots of it, and anger. So I started digging. I spent hours on the computer, cross-referencing names and locations. Slowly, a picture started to form. There was a man named Carter Mulvey, based out of Chicago. He wasn't just involved in Red Horizon, he was running his own operation now. Bigger, bolder, and just as dirty. I knew his name, his address, even the coffee shop where he had his morning meetings. And the more I learned, the more determined I became. I couldn't go to the FBI. They already had what they wanted, Orville. They wouldn't care about some suburban housewife's obsession with revenge. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started with little things. Anonymous tips to the IRS about Carter's offshore accounts. Calls to the local police about suspicious activity near his warehouse. Nothing too big, just enough to make his life uncomfortable. But it wasn't enough. I needed to hit him where it hurt. Then I found out about the shipment. Through a bit of online snooping, and a little eavesdropping at that coffee shop, I learned Carter was expecting a major delivery. Weapons, cash, something big. He was planning to move it through an old trucking company on the outskirts of town. I decided that was where I'd make my move. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my friends, not my family. If something went wrong, I didn't want them involved. I bought a cheap car with cash, dressed in a baseball cap and sunglasses, and waited near the warehouse the night of the delivery. When the trucks pulled in, I dialed the police. But I didn't just call the local cops, I called every agency I could think of. DEA, ATF, FBI. I told them exactly where to find the shipment, what was in it, and who was behind it. Then I drove away and waited for the chaos to unfold. It was all over the news the next day. A massive raid, dozens of arrests, and millions of dollars worth of illegal weapons seized. Carter was front and center, cuffed and glaring at the cameras as they led him away. I couldn't stop smiling. But it didn't stop there. The raid led to more arrests, more investigations. The entire Red Horizon network was unraveled piece by piece. Every man who worked with Orville, every name I found in those old messages, they all went down. And the best part? No one ever suspected me. I thought I'd feel satisfied after Carter was arrested, but there was one loose end I couldn't ignore. Orville. I hadn't spoken to him since the trial. I didn't visit, didn't write, didn't answer when his lawyer called. But now, I wanted him to know what I'd done. I went to see him in prison. He looked different, older, thinner, like life had drained out of him. When he saw me, he looked relieved, even smiled a little. "Eloise," he said softly, like I was some fragile memory from a better time. I didn't waste time with small talk. "It's over," I said, sitting across from him. "Carter, Solace, the whole operation. They're all gone. I made sure of it." His face fell. "What did you do?" "I did what you couldn't," I said. "I finished it." For the first time in my life, I saw fear in Orville's eyes. Not for me, but because he knew what I was capable of. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and looked him in the eye one last time. "We're done," I said. "Don't contact me again." Life didn't magically go back to normal after that, but it got better. The whispers stopped. The pitying looks disappeared. I got a new job in another town, bought a little house, and started fresh. Sometimes, when I'm having a quiet moment, I think about Orville and the life we could have had. But then I remind myself that I didn't just survive his lies, I destroyed them. Revenge doesn't bring back the years I lost, but it gave me something else, freedom. And that's enough.